This starts for me in 7th grade. That was 1992, the 500th anniversary of Columbus's voyage. And to commemorate this, our school had us do these arts and crafts projects. I think ours was making like papier-mâché boats. I realized during that project that our school was just more than happy to just waste our time. That they had no interest in efficiency. They weren't trying to teach us as much as possible in as little time as possible. Instead, it was almost like they were trying to do the reverse. They were trying to make us spend extra time on unnecessary tasks. So this was, for me, the beginning of this realization that maybe there was a more efficient way that I could do education than what was being done in my school. If you look right now at America's education system, we're spending more per student than almost any other country in the world. And we're ranked pretty much near the bottom of civilized countries. I mean, behind us there's just like Cyprus and South Africa. Those are like the only two that are behind us. So obviously our methods aren't working. Over here you have the Prentice Hall biology. Over here you have the Barron's SAT-2 subject test preparation biology. And what you see, this book has more information. And here's the difference. This book is like 3 times as big as this one. I mean, teachers will tell you things like, you should highlight a textbook. Well, if you need to highlight a book, it means that book is broken. Because it means that that book is so full of filler garbage that you need to decide what 2% is actually worthwhile. That's what highlighting is. This picture represents why the books that you get in school are not as good as the books you can get outside of school. This book is trying to show natural selection here. The idea of natural selection is like, the fastest cheetah gets to eat, or the tallest giraffe gets to eat. So over time, cheetahs get faster, and over time, giraffes get faster, get taller. Over here, though, in this book, to illustrate natural selection, they have baby birds, showing that, some baby birds are kind of better at whining for food from mommy, and whichever baby bird is like the best at begging is the one that, wins. In a kind of similar way, the books that you see in schools are not the best books. It's just the companies that are best at kind of working with school boards, that have the best, lobbyists, and are the best at kind of working the system. When you have something like this is the Barron's AP Chemistry book, and this book is written for students. So they try to make the information as accessible and as useful, as simple, and as direct for students that they possibly can. I took what I learned, through my own experience, and I started, after college, I started applying it to a one-on-one tutoring program. I called it Arvin Vohra tutoring. And what I was doing in these programs was essentially taking this idea of efficiency and making that education policy, the education practices that students were doing much more efficient. So instead of taking 6 months to learn something, they could do it in 3 months, or they could do it in 2 months, or sometimes they could do it in 1 month. Because of the success of this program, the demand for the tutoring just went through the roof. I mean, I had to raise my rates again and again and again and again. I started out at $50 an hour. By 2007, I was charging $200 an hour, and there was a wait list, and I was working pretty much just nonstop. So I mean, there was a tremendous amount of demand for this program. And then the stock market collapsed. And after the stock market collapsed, the number of people who could afford to pay $200 an hour for tutoring just rapidly shrunk. And I very quickly realized that if my business was going to survive, we had to find a way to take what we learned in these higher end markets that were where money was essentially no object, and be able to take those methods into the markets where money was very much an object. And that is where this concept of the Vohra method began. The first thing that I started doing is I developed something called a responsive worksheet. I noticed that many students were getting stuck on the exact same types of problems, and that I was essentially teaching the same thing again and again. So what I did is I just typed out the lesson that I was doing again and again and again, and I made essentially a worksheet that was a mini tutoring session by itself. So now, instead of having to explain things, I could just hand a student something. And I realized that I could start to work with many more students than I was before. First it'd be 2 or 3 students at a time, because we didn't have that many worksheets yet. So what I decided to do is essentially build a full curriculum based on this idea of a responsive worksheet. And that meant that anytime a student was stuck on something, no matter what, there'd be a worksheet to help him get unstuck on that thing that he was stuck on. You could have a room of 50 kids who all simultaneously get stuck on 50 different areas, and because we have these responsive worksheets, we can actually give each of the 50 kids a different responsive worksheets essentially in a matter of a couple minutes, and then simultaneously address the needs of 50 students as if we were doing one-on-one tutoring with 50 different students at the same time. And what we're seeing is essentially exactly the same results between Vohra method and Arvin Vohra tutoring. There's literally nothing more just useless and boring than like a lecture, especially when you're talking about math or science. So in Vohra method, everything is hands-on. You do every single problem on your own, and if you get stuck, well, guess what? We have a responsive worksheet for wherever you're getting stuck. But it's not going to be a passive learning process where information is kind of thrown at you. It's going to be active, where you are going to be figuring it out. And the other thing is, if you figure out something on your own, you don't forget it. That stays with you for life. That's just an over-the-top, just like wastefully ridiculous way of doing it. You've seen the Apple commercials, the iPhone commercials, where, you know, whatever a person needs, there's an app for that. Like, you know, yeah, there's an app for that. In the class, students are often just so surprised to see that no matter what small, nuanced difficulty they're having, that there actually exists a worksheet file just to deal with just that specific thing. That often in the class, you know, people say just that, you know, yeah, there's a worksheet for that, kind of as a joke. Don't be using those ridiculous formulas they teaching you guys at schools. You see what I'm saying? I mean, nobody reads, you know, a science or math textbook. They're incomprehensible. Nobody reads them because they're not well presented. I mean, oh, for God's sakes. So what you're saying is I found a way to take something that's already like a little bit hard and just make it 50 times more hard than it needs to be? Alright, go with the hybridization worksheet. Like, this conversation is just too ridiculous to even have. I love beating up on this kind of stuff.